Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharma Rashtra Jayate. Om Hri Om. Namaste, everyone. Welcome to all of you who are here for our latest weekly satsangha. This is a service that is provided by the International Sanatana Dharma Society. And this is something that, for those who are new and may not know what they've stumbled across, this is something that we do every single Monday at 7 p.m. Central Time. And it is what is traditionally termed a satsangha. That is a spiritual gathering, but of course online via live stream. And what we usually do is I give a little bit of a talk, and then that's followed by questions and answers. And that is indeed what we will be doing today as well. However, we are doing something special. For those of you who were here last week, you know that we are doing essentially a 6-week class on the Isha Upanishad. And last week was the very beginning of this class, the very first session, and we commented upon the invocation mantra, the invocation to this very short Upanishad. What we're going to be doing over the course of the next several weeks is going through the verses of this Upanishad, and we can do that in 6 weeks because it's not a very big Upanishad. It's not very long. It's in fact one of the shorter of the Upanishads. Despite its brevity, however, it is an Upanishad that is very, very deep philosophically, and it's universally recognized, and by universally I mean by all Vedantists, whoever they are, all legitimate Vedantists recognize the Isha Upanishad as being one of the most important Upanishads to discuss and to comment upon. Thus, many of the traditional Vedantists, the Bhashyakaras, those individuals who wrote commentaries on Vedanta, most, if not all of them, wrote commentaries on this Upanishad. What we're going to be looking at is my translation. This is not anyone else's. This is my translation that I translated several years ago when I first taught this class on the Isha Upanishad. So with that, if you wish to follow along, please feel free to look in the description of this video, and you'll see the verses that we're going to go through today. And specifically, we're going to go through 3 verses. That is verses 1, 2, and 3 of the Isha Upanishad. So with that, we'll do them one at a time. Let's start with the very first one. And I'll just read the English translation. And again, this is my translation. All that is within the universe is sustained and encompassed by the Lord. One should therefore protect the self through renunciation. Do not desire for other people's wealth, with the understanding of who is the true possessor. So beautiful, beautiful verse, and this is a rather well-known verse, as are many of the verses of the Isha Upanishad. Again, it's a very important Vedic scripture. So as a result, the last verse, as people may know, is an extremely well-known verse. It's actually recited by many people in Vedic gatherings, Hindu gatherings, etc. And the same with this verse as well. Very, very well known. Well, let me comment on this verse a little bit. All right, first of all that is within the universe is sustained and encompassed by the Lord. Now, what is interesting are several things to be said about this one verse here. And that is that, first of all, if you recall what was said in the previous verse, this is, first of all, kind of a continuation of the thought. And that is that according to Vedanta, there are three reals, philosophically, what in the West would be called reals, what Aristotle, for example, referred to as reals. That is, those things that all of reality can be basically broken down into, their fundamental base. Well, according to all Vedanta, there are three reals. These are Brahman, that is God, Atman, individual self, and then what is called Jagat, or material reality. Well, that's what was one of the things that was spoken of in the previous verse, that is the invocation. Now we're kind of continuing with that thought, because all three of these things are mentioned here. First of all, what is being mentioned right off the bat in this very first sentence is Jagat, the material universe. So thus, all that is within the material universe. Now, interestingly, the Isha Upanishad right here wants to limit what it is saying to the material universe for right now. So not all of reality. We know that in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is explained as being the source, as being the sustainer of all material and spiritual realities. Well, right now we are indeed talking about Jagat, that is materiality, and you'll see why in a moment. So first, all that is within the material universe, and by implication, of course, we can understand this means any material universe, all material universes. So everything that is here is sustained and encompassed by the Lord. So very interesting. This is speaking about now Jagat as well as Brahman, so two of the elements of what is called Tritattva, or the three realities, the three reals. All right, so now let's talk about this, just this opening line just for a moment. First of all that we can perceive and conceive, because by definition, this is how we interrelate with anything that is material, with indeed the world around us. It is either perceptual or conceptual. So everything that we can conceive, everything that we can perceive, that is, everything that is within the purview of materiality, and to make it more personal, within our specific universe, is sustained by God. And this is something that we know, of course. This is one of the distinguishing attributes of God, that God is indeed the sustainer. And it's very interesting how God is seen as the creator, really, indirectly, the creator, the sustainer, and really, let's say, the ultimate dissolution of all material reality. But it's especially in this functional aspect as sustainer that God is known to be God. And the reason why is because to sustain is the hardest of all three of those elements, of all three of those actions. To create, to sustain, or to destroy. It is sustaining that is the hardest. So this is why this is one of the designations of God, that God is the sustainer. Thus, as we know, one of the names of God, and in fact the highest name of God, is Narayana. Narayana. And the very translation of that name of God is the sustainer of all beings. That being who is the sustainer of all beings. So thus this is one of the functions of God. But also the material universe is encompassed by God. In other words, this points to, of course, again, the omnipresence of God. The fact that there is no place within the material universe, within materiality, what to speak of spiritual reality. There is no place where God is not. The entire creation, everything that is perceivable, again, and conceivable, is encompassed, is interpenetrated by the very being of God. And indeed, it is that very interpenetrating of God's being with material reality that gives material reality its being. Quite literally, its being, its ability to be sustained, etc. So it is very nice. This is beginning with bringing together these two things. Again, Jagat and Brahman, explaining the relationship between the two, but also it's a divine ontological statement in which it is explaining a little bit about what is the nature of God. Just a little bit. Of course, there's no limit to how deep it could go, but this is where it has decided to let's say, limit its its explanation of the attributes of God to these two things, and we'll see why as we continue. Let's go on with the rest of the verse. One should therefore protect the self, atman, through renunciation. Now is introduced the third element of the tri tattva. Tri in Sanskrit means three. It means the number three. So tri tattva. Tattva means reality. So now the third element is introduced, and that is atman. So you see how, not surprisingly, this is a very Vedantic text. And in fact, Vedanta itself is predicated. It's predicated knowledge-wise upon the Upanishads, among a few other scriptures. So let's talk about this next sentence just for a short time. One should therefore protect the self through renunciation. Now, it's very interesting how this sentence is explaining this, that we must protect the self. What is meant by protect the self? Well, of course, where do we, as most of us, beings who are in illusion, where do we find ourselves? Within this material realm, within, again, the realm of illusion. We find ourselves in a very precarious state, where at any moment we can experience sufferings, we can experience confusion, delusion, we can experience so many negative things, pains, etc. And of course, positive things as well. That's part of the duality. But what is meant here by protect ourselves is indeed to rid ourselves of all of these pains and burdens. How do we protect the self? Meaning, how do we alleviate our suffering, but then positively, how do we also know the bliss of the divine and the bliss of our own self? So let's go on. One should protect the self, and now, very quickly, the way that we do this is explained very quickly within the very beginning of these three verses that we're going to look at, so that it's not a mystery that we have to wait for. How do we protect the self? Through renunciation. Through renunciation, through a healthy renunciation. And what does that mean? That means understanding, what is the nature of our true self? What is it that our true self, our atman, our soul, what do we actually possess, and what is that which we wish to possess, but which in actuality is not a possession, but is a burden? So in other words, if we understand what is the actual nature of our soul, what is the actual nature of self, and if we were to understand what it is that our atman truly, inherently, innately possesses as its attributes, as its properties, its powers, etc., we would be astounded beyond words. If we understand the richness, in other words, that we have within us, if we understood the strength and the beauty and the wisdom and on that we possess naturally within us. If we were to understand this, we would truly be astounded. However, of course, being an illusion, what do we do instead? We look for wealth outside of ourselves. When I say wealth, I don't mean quite literally, but in some cases, yes. But those things that we think we desire, we search for outside of ourselves. And more, we try to take it from others. We try to lay ownership over that which is not ours. And in this way, we become attached to illusion. We become attached to literally wealth, to money, to name and fame, fortune, etc., possessions. We become attached to things that are, by their very nature, both temporary and really having nothing to do with our true self, because they are temporary. Because they're temporary, we can conquer things in this world, conquer wealth and property and fame and all these things. But by definition, because they are temporary, we won't have them for long. And they're not something that are inherent to who we truly are. So thus we're in illusion. This is why people are greedy. This is why people are materialistic. This is why, in the even more subtle ways, this is why people are not just externally greedy, but egotistical. This is why people seek fame, seek to make themselves people of great importance and seek power, etc., etc. So thus, the remedy to such illusion is to do the opposite, to live a life of renunciation. And what does that mean? Well, that simply means understanding Again, who and what we truly are, what are our inherent qualities, and again, our inner wealth, our spiritual wealth that we have, juxtaposed to that which is an illusion, and we reject the illusion. We reject the illusion. Thus, truly spiritual individuals, not fakers, not frauds, not individuals who are pretending to be spiritual for one psychological hang-up or another. Individuals who truly are spiritual are, by definition, renunciates. They're renunciates. They're individuals for whom the externals really mean nothing other than the pure functionality that they serve. Food means nothing, but I eat such that my body will continue. A home means nothing, but I need shelter, etc. You're not attached. We use these material items, but yet we're not attached to them in any way. And this goes back to a theme that I have spoken about hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of times, and that is the idea of renunciation is one in which we can surrender to the stereotype of renunciation or to understand the deeper laws of renunciation. The stereotype is indeed, interestingly, external, even though it claims to be spiritual. And that is, a true renunciate is someone who quite literally renounces everything and lives in a cave. Well, that's external. And that's something which, while it may look good, does not necessarily mean that the individual is renounced within. Indeed, Krishna, the Bhagavad Gita, explains this to Arjuna, that more important than simply the externalities of renunciation is what is happening within the person. They may be renounced as far as engaging in some activity, but if they're constantly thinking about it, they're not renounced. So thus, what true renunciation is to not be attached to that which is temporary. But you still use what is temporary. My clothing are temporary. I am a renunciate. My clothing is temporary, but I'm going to wear it, understanding that it's temporary. This is what it means to be a true renunciate, is yes, we use the things of this world. We need to eat. We need to have shelter. We need to have clothing, etc., etc. I would not be able to do this very live stream with you if I didn't have a microphone in front of me and a computer in front of me and lighting, etc., etc. But it is being used in God's service. So therefore, it's being used in a renounced manner. Let's go on now to the very last sentence of this verse. Do not desire for other people's wealth with the understanding of who is the true possessor. So a continuation of the previous sentence, the thought of the previous sentence. Do not desire for other people's wealth. In other words, don't be envious. Don't be envious. If others have things that we do not, and we see that they do, don't be envious of them. Understand that, yes, this is karma. This is karma coupled with an individual's initiative to do what is necessary to earn the possessions that they have. But if someone else has something that you do not, well, it was their good karma, probably coupled with the fact that they worked harder than you and they're smarter than you. It's a combination of various things. But there's no reason to become envious. On the contrary, what we need to understand is who is rich in this life will be poor in the next life and vice versa. Again, this is the nature of the duality of this world. And understanding the nature of this duality, and again, being detached, being renounced, we should be at peace. Understanding that, oh, this person has less than me. This person has more than me. I have more than others. I have less than others. And this is simply the nature of this world. So, do not desire for other people's wealth. But then it goes on with this very, very interesting section, with the understanding of who is the true possessor. Who is that true possessor? That is Isha, that is Ishvara, that is Bhagavan, that is God. Because in actuality, God, again, being the source of all reality, God being the sustainer of all reality. In actuality, God is the possessor of all things that exist. Again, perceivable and conceivable within this material realm, within the realm of this universe. Ultimately, they exist due to God. And they are simply the temporary manifestation of the ever-enervating, ever-changing state of God's energies. So that being the case, everything that we see around us, and we see someone temporarily, oh, this person has such and such acreage of land, this person has this nation, this person has so much wealth, this person has so much fame, etc., etc. In actuality, they're just borrowing it. We can think of the greatest trillionaires in the world today. They are only borrowing their wealth from God, and very temporarily so. God is the ultimate possessor of all things. So with that, let's go on to verse 2 of the Isha Upanishad. And this is, of course, as you'll see, a continuation of the previous verse. Acting in such a manner, that is, with renunciation, a person may wish to live for 100 years. For it is only action performed in such a way that will not bind him to the law of karma. So very nice, especially this first sentence. Actually, it's quite nice how this is stated. Actually, it's almost in a humorous way. Acting in such a manner. So in other words, acting in this perfect way where indeed you engage in activities in the world, but in such a way that internally you're not attached to things. You have this renunciation. You understand that ultimately it is all a manifestation of God's grace, of God's mercy, of God's energies, etc. And in this way, you live a spiritual life, living in spirit and not only within materiality. Living in such a manner, acting in this way, a person may wish to live for 100 years. Now, this sometimes confuses people, even though it really shouldn't, actually. This is a little bit of Vedic humor, and people may not know this, but within the Vedas, you don't find it a lot, but there are some things that are stated in a humorous way. What this is saying is, it's just using 100 years as an arbitrary number that even to this day, a lot of people think of 100 years as a very long lifetime. What this is saying is, if you live in such a way, you will be so happy that you will want to live for 100 years, and you will do so very happily. So that's essentially what this sentence is saying. If you live indeed a life of true spiritual renunciation, understanding what is the nature of reality, what is the nature of wealth and all the things and people that we see around us, etc., then we will be so content, we will be so happy, we will be happy to live for 100 years. That's what this sentence is saying. So now let's go on to the next sentence. For it is only action performed in such a way, that is, renunciation, that will not bind him to the law of karma. So indeed, this is something that we've spoken about many times in the past. And that is precisely how karma is operative within our world and in our actions. You know, when we perform any kind of ethical activity, any kind of activity involving ethics, either good or bad, there is necessarily an equal and opposite reaction to those activities that we engage in. This is what is known as karma. And the only way to transcend such a cause and effect sort of trap, that is samsara, that is being trapped within this material world due to the fact that we are always creating good karma, bad karma, good karma, bad karma, which we then, of necessity, have to experience the phala, the fruits thereof. The only way that we can escape from karma is to act in the world in such a way that we are acting fully spiritually, fully and completely spiritually. That is, again, renunciation. Acting within the world in such a way that we're not attached to our actions, we're not attached to the fruit of our actions, but on the contrary, with everything that we think, with everything we say, with everything we do, that is, with all three modes of action, we are doing so in a spirit of seva, of service to God. And in this way, when we are performing action, there is no karma that is produced, because then that action is purely spiritual. There is no tinge of materiality when we perform actions that are purely spiritual. So this is how we transcend karma, is through, again, such internal renunciation, which is then manifest externally in our actions. Good? All right. Let us go on, please, to the very last verse. And this verse is especially interesting. The realms of the demonic, that is asuras, are regions that are full of darkness and blinding ignorance. That person who disregards the true self, or atman, enters into such darkness at the time of death. So we are continuing here to talk about the nature of soul and action. You'll see that in the very beginning of this, these three verses, first there was the Tritattva. There was discussion of Brahman, of God, of Jagat, of materiality, the material universe, and of Atman. But now what has been discussed here is the nature of Atman as Atman acts within the world. And again, with the idea that renunciation, acting in renunciation, is crucial, is the most important thing, is almost the definition of what it means to be a truly spiritual person. But now we're going into something very interesting here, and this is kind of a warning for individuals who do not act in a renounced sort of way. That is, individuals who choose to remain in ignorance, individuals who choose to remain acting in a state in which they are not renounced, and in fact, on the contrary, they are acting via envy. So let's go through this. First, it describes what it means to be asuric, what it means to be demonic, the realms of the demonic. Let's stop there with just those words right there. And of course, the Sanskrit for demonic is asura. By the realms of the demonic are meant several things. First, quite literally, because in interpreting Vedic scripture, we always have to go with the literal first. This is actually a very important principle in Vedic exegesis, that is, actually analyzing Vedic texts. First, you go with the literal. When you cannot go with the literal, only then do you go with other things that are not literal. But you have to have very good reason. Otherwise, this opens up a realm of possible speculation, which then leads to delusion. But this means quite literally that there is a realm, a demonic realm of asuras. These are the lower planetary realms in which things are quite hellish, and in which there are many demonic beings who inhabit the lower realms. It's interesting. This is just kind of as an aside. In pretty much every traditional culture, see, I have to be very careful. When I say culture, people might think of, 1990s France or something like that, or, something equivalent, 21st century America. No, not just culture. In every traditional culture, you have this notion universally of there being three realms: the heavenly realms, the earthly or middle earth realm, but then the hellish realms. This is not something that is, let's say, exclusive just to Christianity or even just the Abrahamic religions. Name a religion, I can pretty much guarantee they accept these three realms. This is true for Buddhism as well. This is true for Jainism. This is true for certainly Sanatana Dharma. This is true for Zoroastrianism, etc., etc. This is true for all of the ancient religions. Well, it means certainly the realms of the demonic in that sense as an actual geographic location. But more, it also means the asuric mindset, the asuric temperament. Because there are individuals who are presently on the earth planet, who are presently on the earthly plane, who are presently, in other words, here, right now on our planet, who are demonic, who are truly asuras. And they are asuras in human form. They don't necessarily look like monsters, though some of these people are quite ugly, but that's for a different talk. These people don't necessarily look like monsters. They look human. They could pass for human, but they're demonic. They're just as demonic as any sort of metaphysical demonic being. And why? Their temperament is so. So again, when this talks about the realms of the demonic, it's talking about quite literally, geographically speaking, but also as far as internal quality of a human being. So the realms of the demonic are regions that are full of darkness and blinding ignorance. If you're going to be asuric, in other words, if you're going to choose to be a sociopath, if you're going to choose to be a psychopath, if you're going to choose to be a Luciferian, a left-hand path, sort of parasite upon the world, spiritual parasite, etc., etc. If you are going to choose to be evil, then you are going to be an individual who is full of darkness and blinding ignorance. That is essentially what this verse is saying. But then it goes on. That person who disregards the true self, that individual now who can even be a neutral person. They're not necessarily demonic. They're just kind of a neutral person, but they consciously choose to forswear spirituality and to just say, oh, spirituality, oh, that's garbage, not interested. I'm just going to live my materialistic life and just care about number one, just care about me, etc. Such an individual enters into such darkness at the time of death. In other words, such an individual, when they die and are thus reborn, they will be born in darkness. They will be born in a blinding darkness because they have chosen of their own accord, their own free will, to traverse a path such that they have chosen ignorance. So as a result, in their next life, indeed, they will sadly find themselves being born in a place where to grow spiritually will be very, very difficult for them. It will be a dark realm in which they are born. And again, not necessarily meaning only geographically. Oh, they could be born on earth in an advanced nation, etc. But their mindset will be one of darkness. Their mindset will be one of darkness. And that is of their own free will, of their choosing. So thus, to tie this all together, this is how we protect our soul, is by choosing our path very carefully. Very carefully. And the truth of the matter is, this is very good advice, generally speaking, both materially and spiritually. Certainly spiritually, which of course is really what these three verses are aiming at more than anything. But even materially speaking, if we are to have a path in life, even as far as a career, even as far as marriage, even as far as where we're going to live, quite literally what we are going to make the center of our life, we need to make such choices in a very, very careful sort of way. But then speaking spiritually, all of you now who are listening to my words, you're all in human form, except for those individuals who are here who are also devas, who are not perceivable to most of you. Let me just say, those of you who are listening to me right now are at the very least human and above. So thus, what does this mean? You are fortunate. You are fortunate that you were born with a very special capacity. You were born with the capacity to think intellectually, to use logic, to use reasoning, etc., to use your verbal skills. But also you were born in such a manner that you are not a slave to instinct, unlike the lower forms, unlike animals and most asuras, most demonic people and beings who are slaves to their instincts. You have freedom. You have the ability indeed to choose, and to choose whether you will protect your soul, whether you will protect your atman, by living life in such a way that indeed you live the life of a spiritual renunciate. That is, you live your full life in this world, using all of the implements and tools of this world in such a way as is necessary to grow spiritually, but at the same time being within the world but not of the world, being detached, being renounced. You can choose this path or you can choose the other path, which again is discussed in the very last verse that we looked at today, this third verse of the Isha Upanishad. So this is what the Isha Upanishad is asking us to do, and this is what I also am asking you to do, especially at this juncture in history. Please choose wisely. With that, I thank you very much for listening to my discourse on these three verses of the Isha Upanishad. God willing, if the internet is still up, we will continue with this class next week. With that, thank you again for listening. And at this point, let me signal to people, if you would like to begin asking questions, please feel free. This is the time. We have a little bit of time left, a nice amount of time. And if people would like to begin to ask questions, now is the time. I see some questions here already. Here's a very interesting question, actually. The Divine Comedy. I love Dante. I actually studied Dante in college, and wrote a philosophical essay, interestingly, on the Divine Comedy. In the Divine Comedy, Dante depicts betrayal as the most evil sin of all, especially the betrayals by Cassius, Brutus, and Judas. Does Sanatana Dharma agree with this? Yes, betrayal is way up there, actually. Betrayal is way up there. However, we would make a subtle distinction and say that the very root of betrayal is something that is even worse. So again, I would agree with this, actually, and Sanatana Dharma would agree as well, that betrayal is something that is horrific. But what causes betrayal is what I'm trying to say here. That is envy. See, a person does not betray unless they are an envious individual. So even with the individuals who you mentioned, who Dante Alighieri himself mentioned in the Divine Comedy, why did these people betray individuals who trusted them? It was due to envy. So we would say that envy is really a worse sin than betrayal, and it's the foundation of betrayal. So I hope that answers that question. Here's another good question. Namaste Acharyaji. To obtain renunciation is the most effective path focusing on devotion to Narayana. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. In fact, you have the answer in your very question itself. Yes, indeed. I mean, there are many paths that stress the idea of renunciation. So, for example, I can look at Buddhism, for example. Buddhism is also a very renunciate sort of path, even though the Buddha himself said that he was formulating a middle path, one of non-extremes, in which the idea was to avoid both hedonistic pleasure, but on the other hand, extreme asceticism on the other. The truth of the matter is, Buddhism, as it has been practiced since the time of the Buddha, is indeed one of deep renunciation. However, this is the difficulty, is that if an individual wishes to practice a life of renunciation in a vacuum, that is, without a positive attainment or goal which they wish to achieve, and more, if they want to be renounced without being renounced for the sake of love, then that renunciation is going to be very dry, spiritually speaking. It's going to be very difficult. And this is why, indeed, the greatest way to be a renunciate is not just in a neutral or general sort of way, because you're not going to last long without the element of love and without the element of having a deeper purpose for that renunciation. Rather, it is when we express devotion toward God that we then introduce that sweetness, that spiritual sweetness that is necessary to truly make our renunciation something that's worthwhile. Otherwise, we're just renouncing for the sake of renouncing. And that's similar to example that Prabhupada gave actually several times, that you have a child who, for example, is doing something you don't want them to. You can tell them, stop doing that. And they may or may not, and even if they do, they're going to be bitter about it. Or you can say, stop that, and instead, here's something to occupy your time. And you offer them some candy, or you offer them something interesting, a toy or something superior that they can play with. Well, in this way, they will renounce that negative thing that they shouldn't be doing, but for a positive reason. And as a result, that very renunciation on the part of the child will end up being something sweet and not just something that will make them bitter. So yes, the best way to practice renunciation is indeed to have devotion toward Sriman Narayana. Very good. Good. Sri Ram asks here, if an atman hears the name of God, does it become liberated immediately? Tricky question. It of course, I'm looking at your wording, and I'm going to assume that your wording is strategic and sharp, as my words always are. And you even have Atman in quotations here. And I'm just going to If I'm wrong in my interpretation of how you're asking this, then please feel free to correct me. But if you're asking if quite literally the atman, so in other words, not just a person in the material body in ignorance, but if quite literally the atman itself in its pure form hears the name of God, does it become liberated immediately? Then that's a very interesting question. The answer to that is very tricky. And, I don't want to give you a pat answer. I want to truly answer this in a way that is both philosophically but scripturally accurate as well. Pure Atman, being in its pure state, that is being a being who is pre-fall, that is a being who is not necessarily in the material world or being in the material world, and Atman having the ability to bypass the ear, to bypass materiality, and to quite literally experience the name of God. Does that Atman have the ability to become liberated? It depends. It depends. Because the truth of the matter is, simply hearing the name alone, even if it's quite literally the Atman itself that is experiencing the name of God, if that Atman is in enough illusion, it still has to come to the point where it has the ability to overcome those burdens of materiality that is keeping it in illusion. I hope that makes sense. That process still has to occur. And otherwise, there would indeed be such a thing as instant enlightenment. The moment that the Atman itself has the ability to perceive the name of God, it would be instantly enlightened, and we find very few instances of that. Now, that's the first thing, but now there's a more important and nuanced addendum that I have to add to this, and that is that if the Atman is indeed in such a state where it is close to liberation anyway, in other words, its illusion is not very deep, then indeed, if the Atman has the ability to perceive the name of God purely, that is, Atman without the medium of ear, that is, Atman itself perceives the name of God, then yes, there is indeed the possibility that Atman can become liberated. So, I hope that answers the question without going too much deeper. Here is a very, very, very pertinent question, very important, very timely question that I'm going to answer. And this is from Harvey27. Hello and namaste. Currently struggling a lot. Lockdown has me doing online school alone inside my living room, an increasingly sterile and atomized life. I have not even been motivated to meditate. Any advice? Yes, first of all, you have my sympathies. You truly have my sympathies. You're not alone. This lockdown is something truly horrific, truly horrible that people have been experiencing to greater or lesser degrees, depending on their nation, depending on if they're in America, what state they're in. So, for example, in California and New York, it's a lot stricter than Nebraska. In Nebraska, there's no lockdown whatsoever. People can do anything they want here. So it really depends on where you are. But yes, a lot of people are experiencing, as you described this, a very sterile, atomized kind of life where you feel isolated, you're kind of trapped at home, and it's difficult to feel motivated under such circumstances. The reason being is that we're social beings. We are beings who we need association. We need company. We need to be able to get outside and have fresh air once in a while, etc. It's like we're trapped. It's like we're prisoners in our own home. Again, not so much myself. I'm in Nebraska where everything is freed up. But for many people, there's the feeling of being a prisoner in your own home. And first of all, the fact that you say you're doing online school, that is wonderful. It's important to keep your mind occupied as much as possible. I don't know if there are other ways, hopefully, it depends on your time, how much time you have. If there are other ways to occupy your mind as well, and I don't mean video games, I don't mean Netflix, I mean reading spiritual scriptures, etc. Having discussions with people as much as possible, even if you can't physically meet, have online discussions, call up family members, call up friends, use Skype, use things like this just to keep your mind occupied. But then you mention this last thing, that it's been difficult to be motivated even to meditate. Again, you're not alone. This doesn't make you a bad person. In such circumstances, it's difficult. Unless you are a truly, really trained yogi and, again, renunciate, it is difficult to be in an isolated circumstance and to continue with sadhana, to meditate, to be spiritually motivated, etc. This is what I would suggest is, again, online, even if you need to do this online, try to get as much positive association, fellowship with others as is possible. That is why it's interesting. This is why we began doing these live streams. For people who have watched my videos for years and years, you know that we didn't do any live streams until just with this COVID outbreak. And this is the reason why, is indeed to give people association who are exactly in your position. Individuals who are stuck at home and they're feeling kind of hopeless and lost spiritually. Please take advantage of this live stream, which we will continue to do every single week, but also any other individuals you can find. They don't even have to live in your same area. Just online, if you find individuals who also are on the same path, who are spiritual, who are striving to know God, to know themselves, to meditate, etc., become friends online with these people. This is what's called satsangha, good association. And it's interesting how in the Vedic scriptures, in the Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, so many different scriptures, it talks about how if a person wishes to practice spirituality in a serious way, having good association with others who are also on the path is crucial. It's very important. So I would say do your best to not feel isolated by positively reaching out to others. Don't be shy. This is not a time to be shy, even if you are shy. People may be shocked by this, but I am an inherently shy person, as are interestingly many of my students. It tends to, in fact, be shy people who actually become attracted to truth. It's very interesting. It's because they tend to be very contemplative. This is not a time to be shy. Reach out to other people. Make friends. You are on Facebook, on whatever, social media. You see someone who they're saying wonderful things and they seem like a good, positive, happy, spiritual person. Reach out to them and just say, hey, you sound like a great person. Let's chat. Let's talk. And in this way, keep yourself encouraged by not feeling alone. See, that's the main thing about this lockdown, is that so many people, if you live in a big house with a family, that's better. But so many people live by themselves. Maybe they'll have a roommate or something. And it's so easy to feel alone. So again, this is what I would suggest is do your best to reach out to others. Don't feel alone. And not just anyone. Reach out to spiritual people. People who you know are... This is hard for people, what I'm about to say, because of ego. Reach out to people who you know are spiritually more advanced than you. Don't be afraid to. Don't be afraid to look for people who are going to inspire you. Not just people who are kind of on your same level. That too a little bit, certainly. But look for people who you know are more advanced than you, because this is actually what we need to ourselves advance. Good. And I hope that was helpful. And let me just say this one last thing. And this is to you and really to everyone. Please don't lose hope. Please do not lose hope. These lockdowns are not going to go on forever. There is no new normal in the way that some people, the wrong people, mean. There is light at the end of this tunnel, and this is going to end. So please be patient. Do not lose hope and understand God is with you, even during this trial. Very good. Good. And of necessity, I'm going to kind of skip a few of these questions because I want to give everyone kind of a good chance to have their questions answered. So I'm going a little bit further along toward the bottom of the chat and see if there are any people who I should get to who otherwise I wouldn't see their questions. So just give me a few moments to look at these. This I can answer very, very quickly, but it's a good question. Old School Egyptian asks, are the claims by modern scholars true that the Bhavishya Purana and other Puranas that have given accurate prophecies have been altered by modern people? No, the modern scholars are fools. I know. I can say that. You see, some people, they'll say that, but they really don't have a right to say that. I have a right to say that because I have a PhD and I know many of these scholars. I've given academic talks to audiences of 50 and 100 scholars, professors at a time. So I can say this. No, they're fools. The reason why they say such a thing is indeed because they're atheists, and thus, that being the case, the idea that there are beings, what we call rishis, that there are seers who indeed, due to metaphysical reasons, they have the ability to peer into the future and know what is going to happen and then write these things down. Such an idea to atheistic, materialistic scholars is nonsense. So they don't have the ability to quite understand this. No, the truth of the matter is the Bhavishya Purana is accepted as one of the traditional 18 major Mahapuranas, and all of the Puranas predict things about the modern world. Indeed, we don't have a lot of time to go into this, but if, for example, if you look at the descriptions of the Kali Yuga that are explained all throughout the Puranas, and especially Mahabharata, etc., if you look at these descriptions, many of these verses are describing the conditions that we are experiencing quite literally today in 2021 in 2021. And certainly the Puranas were not written in 2020. They were written, even if you accept the very faulty rulings of these atheistic scholars, the Puranas are at the very least thousands of years old. And yet they are describing conditions that are true quite literally today in the news. So how do you explain this? These were seers. These were individuals who had the ability to pierce through reality and to see what is. So yes, the Puranas are accurate. Very good. There's a personal question here that I've contemplated answering, but I won't, only because now is probably not the time. So I'm going to stick to philosophical ones. Here's an interesting question with the time we have. Shri Acharyaji, in light of the apparent fall of the current technocratic paradigm, what is the role of technology in the Dharma nation, and what would be the principles of Dharmic technology? Very nice. Very nice. First of all, there has always been technology in one form or another. It's simply a matter of, is that technology tamasic, rajasic, or sattvic? In other words, is technology of the nature of darkness and ignorance and evil? Is it of the nature of that which is overly energetic in a passionate sort of way, so thus, for example, dedicated to the acquisition of wealth, etc., and power? Or is that technology something that is sattvic, that is something that is perfectly aligned with the spiritual in such a way that we can maximize our ability to accomplish things within this material world as a result of technology, while on the other hand, not taking away from ourselves spiritually, not harming ourselves spiritually. So that is sattvic. So indeed, there will be technology in the future, but that technology will be more sattvic, and more than anything, in how it is applied. You see, again, right now, you can't see, but I have a massive computer in front of me. Very, very large, very powerful computer. That's what I'm speaking to you through. And what is a computer? Of course, it's technology, but it's not so much the nature of the technology itself. It's not how, quite literally, the material parts and data and and code, etc., are placed together that make it either good or bad. Rather, it's how it's being used. So there are some people who are using a similar sort of computer for evil. And, you can come up with your own examples. I don't need to provide examples. Well, I'm using this computer for good. This is a computer that I use to give talks like this, to write books, to organize this ever-expanding movement known as the International Sanatana Dharma Society, and generally to bring Dharma to this world and to restore Dharma in this world. So in the same way, let me just tell you this. What we envision as far as a Dharma nation in the future is a world in which nature will be predominant. Oh, there will be a celebration of nature, the likes of which has not been experienced in hundreds, if not thousands of years. On the one hand, on the other hand, we will still have technology. We will still have computers. We will still be able to communicate across the planet in nanoseconds, etc. So it is a perfect combination of a coming together of vidya and avidya. And I use those two terms very specifically. That is the material and the spiritual. The spiritual and the material. Vidya being the spiritual, avidya being material. The reason why I use these two terms is because in the future we're going to see that there is one verse from the Isha Upanishad that we're going to look at that says precisely this: you must know both, and you must use both if you are to truly be wise. So I hope that answers the question. With that, very sadly, it is 8 o'clock my time, so it's the top of the hour, so we're going to be strict and stop here for now. But also because I do have a few very, very quick closing remarks that I want to make before we end this session, and we will go over by just a few minutes, not more than 4 or 5 at the most. But this is important, and that is, I want to reassure everyone of what I have been saying for quite some time. This may sound repetitive, but it's actually not. It's something that we need to hear right now. With everything, with all the craziness that is happening in the world on so many different fronts in so many different places, I just want to tell people this message, remind people of this message again. Do not lose hope. Do not become distracted by what you're seeing in the mainstream media and in the news. Do not become distracted by despair, by hopelessness, etc. Understand that as dark as things may seem right now, we knew this was going to happen. Indeed, I've warned you for years that things would become much darker before the light finally came, before the sun of Dharma finally arose. So the fact that things seem truly crazy and chaotic and very dark right now, we were told. I told you. I've been told. We have been told in myriad ways that things would get worse before they get better. So this is the thing. Do not lose hope, whatever you do. Continue to be positive, continue to be spiritual, continue to understand that this is temporary. This is like a temporary dark cloud that is covering the sun of truth and justice. If you see a cloud, however dark it may seem, and it's covering up the sun, is the sun itself affected? No. Of course not. The sun is still there. The sun is not missing. The sun is not gone. The sun has not been killed. It's just covered up by a temporary illusion. In the same way, we are going to get through this, let me tell you. And I say this, I hope it gives you hope. But I'm not saying this just to give you hope. I'm saying this because it's true, in the literal sense. We are going to get through this. Things are going to get better. Be a little bit more patient. Wait a little bit longer. Understand that actually things might continue to get even a little bit worse. But ultimately, evil is going to be defeated. I guarantee you this with my life. Evil will be defeated. Good will triumph. And sooner than you think. So never lose hope. Always take shelter of God. Always understand that God is with us. That's something no one can take away. That's something no evil force can ever remove from us. God is always with us. And God wins in the end. with that, I thank you for being here with me again for this satsangha. Just a few reminders. If you have not already done so, please subscribe to this channel to watch more videos and live streams like this. Please like this video because that helps in having other people have the opportunity to have this video suggested, recommended to them. So please like this video if you can, if you've liked it. If you didn't like it, don't hit the like button. If I hope you did like it, then please hit that like button because again, it does help. When you have a chance, please visit our website, dharmacentral.com. All one word, dharmacentral.com. When you're there, you'll see that you can join our email list. Please do that so that we can stay in touch. We see that the internet has become a very precarious place now. We don't know what the future holds. We don't know if the internet will continue to be something stable or if the internet itself might disappear for a short period of time. So please give us your email address, any other contact information by going to Dharma Central and joining our list. That's there, our mail list. Also, when you're there, please consider becoming a member of the International Sanatana Dharma Society. If and only if you are in a position to do so, we need your help now more than at any other time. Because now, more than at any other time, people need to hear this message that you heard today. They need to hear this life-enhancing, life-giving message of Dharma and of hope. To do this, we need your help. Please become a member of the International Sanatana Dharma Society, and in that way, you can help us by giving a monthly tithing donation of whatever you choose. It can be as little as you choose, as much as you choose, but please help us to continue to help the world. And with that, as I always say, and especially right now, please take very good care of yourselves in every way. Have your head on a swivel, as we say. Have situational awareness. Be very careful and take good care of yourselves, but also knowing that ultimately everything is going to be wonderful. Everything will be good. And with that, thank you again for being here, and I hope to see you again all next Monday as we continue with the Isha Upanishad. And with that, Namaste. Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharma Rashtra Jayate. May the Sun of Dharma arise. And give us all light. Please take good care of yourselves.